What's going on, everybody, and welcome to episode 33. I'm your host, Marcus, and in this episode, we are talking about mourning loss. Now, previously, I've talked about my father, I've talked about divorce, and overcoming adversity when these things happen in life is something that is not always easy, because I think we are told we have to be strong no matter what happens. And if you show any sign of weakness, that you're wrong, right? You shouldn't have any kind of sensitive side. And I grew up in a household where you were completely macho. You don't show a sensitive side to you. And my dad was the most macho person I ever knew. And being said, talking about this, when you're talking about mourning a loss, whether it's a relationship, a personal or relationship, or whether it's that if it's your father or a close, intimate relationship, right? Ultimately understanding that it's okay to give yourself time, right? And a lot of times when I talk about, trying to be strong and not showing signs of weakness, we hold a lot of it in and we try to patch it with other things, typically other negative things that are associated to perhaps drinking alcohol, something like that, or perhaps something else to help us soften the blow that's going on, because we don't want to face the reality of the situation, of the loss that we are going through. And again, if it's a relationship, or if it's a parent, sibling, whatever the case is, somebody close to you, mourning that loss can be extremely hard, however that is, if it's a breakup or if that person has passed away. And understanding that you have to give yourself time. And when I reflect back on, my divorce or my father's passing, I look at this thing, I look at the situation, and, I couldn't see past the day. I couldn't see my life, what would happen without that person in my life. And you get to that point to, it's extremely hard because we're used to having that, right? We're used to having that person in our lives and be able to rely on whatever it is, whatever kind of comfort that person brought, whatever kind of routine that person brought. We don't have that anymore. And so we need to actually mourn that, right? We need to actually focus on that. And when I'm talking about my father and looking back at that, again, I couldn't look past the day. Again, every time I thought about my father, it was extremely hard that I couldn't just call him up anymore. And when you look at that and reflecting on that, right, I try to soften the blow by keeping myself busy to essentially almost run away from the reality of the situation. And I do believe you should do that, but you should also, you should have positive things in your life that you incorporate during a loss, right? You should grieve. You need to grieve. We have to grieve. As human beings, we need to grieve. We need that grieving process. With that being said, you should have a time limit on it. You shouldn't go forever just thinking life just isn't going to be the same, because life won't be the same. Life is different from that day forward. It's changed forever. Yes. And being said, we move on. We learn to deal with the new reality that we have been given. And so you need to mourn that, right? You need to mourn the passing of whatever that was, whatever the person, whatever kind of relationship that was. You need to mourn that. You need to face that. And again, when I first lost my father, it was extremely hard for me. And I tried to just keep myself busy and not even think about it. And then when I would think about it, it would be overwhelming. Right. And this, I think, leads a lot of people to become overwhelmed, have anxiety because they hold it in because they don't want to show signs of weakness. And so being said, it took me a long time to come around and start actually facing it. And then I started pushing myself more to having that time to grieve and actually think about the situation, about what the reality of the situation. And that is when I really started finding a true relief, right? That I was coping and understanding of the reality of the situation and realizing that, okay, I can actually move on from this, I realized that life will never be the same. I realized that things have changed from this point forward. And I've talked about this a lot of different times about how you can pinpoint specific times in your life where things were just never the same. Those are turning points in your life. And the passing of my father, right, the divorces, right, those are major turning points in your life, right? Things will never go back to the way they were. Relationships are a little different, right? If you look at relationships, you get a divorce, right? They'll never go back to the way they were. And it's essentially why you had the divorce anyway, right? And we're coming to that realization that the relationship that it was in the beginning will never be the same as it was now, because things change. And we have to understand that things do always change. Things will never be the same. We were different people many years ago than we are today. And that we have to have that adaptability and understand that this point forward, no, we'll never be the same, but I need the time to myself to grieve in the loss. I need to face the reality of the situation and realize that it's okay to cry, just let it out, right? I think that was the biggest thing that I was running away with my father was I didn't want to, right? Because feeling emotion with my father just wasn't the thing. And so to think about that, not having him in my life, not being able to just call him up and just talk about whatever, and he'd be more than willing to just listen, and not having that anymore was hard. And so I didn't want to face that. And I realized that, okay, I need to actually face this. And so the more time I spent, yes, it was extremely hard. It was a very emotional time, right? And trying to get through that and facing it, right, as opposed to trying to run from it or cover it up with something else. And doing this, right, it allowed me, it was extremely painful, right, because I had gone months on end just keeping myself busy, just trying to not think about it. I don't know how many miles I must have ran in those first couple months, because I've never ran that much. I was running half marathons almost every other day, right? And that's not something I never did before that point. I was just trying to keep my mind busy. Every time I started thinking about my father, I'd throw my gym clothes on and I would just start running. And being said, I never actually addressed the reality of the situation. And so looking back on it, I realized what I was doing. And so I started forcing myself to think about my father, start forcing myself to think about my new reality. And that was painful to understand that. Do you just ever forget that person? No, you're never going to forget that person. That person's forever in your life, right? Now, this is going back to if it's a relationship, it's a ex-husband or ex-wife, or if it is the passing of a parent, sibling, somebody close to you. And understand that you need that grieving time. Once you have that grieving time, you need to let it out, right? Give yourself a time frame in which you can pull yourself back in, right? You don't want to allow yourself to think that things will never get better, right? Things don't get better, but you understand you learn to live with it, right? You overcome the adversity because you learn to live with it, and you learn to appreciate things a lot more. You learn to appreciate the relationships that you have in your life, and you learn that there's some things in your life you just shouldn't neglect, and time being the most precious thing of all, right? Those people that you want in your life, you need to let them know that you want them in your life. They need to know that, right? And I think, again, we forget how important time is in these relationships, because when you come to something like this, when you're starting to grieve to it, is when you start really thinking about that time. And even looking back at the time with my father, I told him so many years, right? Like I was going to go up and visit him, and I would just wait because I had time. And we tend to forget as adults, right? You only see your parents. If you don't live close, you only see your parents maybe a handful of times the rest of your life as an adult, unless you're really close and you're constantly moving, right? As a man, I believe the statistics are for a male that they don't see their parents as often as a female does her parents. And I'm a good statistic of that, because I haven't really seen my parents as an adult. And so I wish I had spent more time with my father. He kept asking me to go up and go fishing with him. He kept asking to do all these other different things. I said, yes, when I get the time. And then when you get to the point where you start grieving, you start thinking, man, I could have just went and done it. I could have took the time, right? But things being said and done, and maybe you're at that point to where, you are starting to grieve. And so you can't hold on to that. You have to cherish the good moments you had and realize at this point going forward, I need to focus on the time that I spend in my relationships in my life. And you notice when you get older, you're much more like this. You want to only have those people in your life that really make you feel good, right? You don't have time for people that want to be energy suckers, or people that want to talk negative about other people, right? You don't want to associate yourself with those kind of people, right? You want to be in a good place. And so you have to, the relationships you have, you want to make sure that the time spent in those relationships is worthwhile, and that you're doing it solely dedicated with those people that you want in your life, and make sure that the priority in your life is going to those people that matter in your life. And so grieving, when you're trying to move forward, you have to start looking for these things. Give yourself that time to heal, right? And really sit down. And this is the thing I want to talk about, trying to not patch it with some form of substance, right? Or try to patch it with just losing your mind and going haywire and going out and doing a bunch of stuff you don't normally do, right? That may have a negative impact on your life, but trying to just sit down quietly, right? And this is why meditation and breathing and all these different things, why I push these things so much, because they force me to sit down. They force me to think about these things, because I was running away from these things, and it allowed me to grieve. It was very painful to think that life will never be the same from this point, but it allowed me to overcome a lot of that stuff. It allowed me to see a different view on life, right? It changes your perspective, and it really matters to you how you're going to essentially deal with relationships, deal with your future after that particular moment. Because again, this is that pivot in your life where you are going to start making change in your life. And so you have to focus on the relationships, give yourself time to grieve, and then move forward. This life will never be the same, but get it out. The sooner you can get it out, the sooner you can just, bawl your eyes out, whatever you need. For me, I shed a lot of tears. I worked out a lot, right? You got to have that stress relief. That helps a lot. I had stuff to build, right? Like I had Discover Ignite. I had all these other different things I was trying to build at the same time. It kept me preoccupied. It kept me busy, but ultimately understand this is part of your grieving cycle. And then allow yourself and not tuck it away. Bring it to the forefront, address it. It is extremely important. Not tuck it away and think that it's a sign of weakness for you, that things will never be better. Yes, things just change. We have to realize that life just changes, whether we want it to or not. Change is, again, always forced upon us, right? You can make the change that you want, or life will give you change that you don't want. And a lot of times you'll still get stuff, even though you're trying to make a good change, you'll still get change that you don't want. But you have to realize that we have to be able to adapt and come to the realization that it's going to happen no matter if you want it to or not. This is the way we are designed, by design, right? We force change if there is no change in the current moment. As much as I talk about how, setting up a routine and everything is extremely beneficial, you have to understand that if there is no change, right, we get bored and we start getting a little bit chaotic, right? We start making choices that we typically won't make because there is no actual change going on. And so when you're going through these changes moving forward, you need to make the changes that you want and really focus again where that time is going. and don't put up with anything that doesn't align with where you want to go in life. And a lot of times you may feel like you don't know where you want to go from this point. You've grieved, you're still confused, you don't know what to go on, but you have to realize that, it's that saying, once one door shuts, another door opens, right? There's something else out there. It's because this part of your story has closed doesn't mean there's been 3 other doors that have been open. It is up to you to move forward from that point. That's why I'm talking about grieving and letting it go, because this allows you to start looking for these other doors, these other opportunities that are out there, right? I think everything's happens for a reason, and so this next opportunity, whatever it is, and whatever, if it's a relationship, if you've been divorced, or if it was a passing of someone you love. Not to just get over them, but to give you a perspective, right? I try to always look at things as lessons, really, right? I'm trying to sway away from the whole positive, negative thing, but understand that there's always a lesson there. And when you have the passing of a loved one, it's just a reinforcement to try to make you understand that the time that you have, right, is very minute. We are essentially a ticking clock, right? It's counting down. Our countdown has started. However old you are, you don't know when that expiration date is. You have to realize that you only have one life. And something actually came up during the week. It's very similar to this that I wanted to initially talk about, but I felt like this was more of a topic that I could aim for. And that is understanding just, I've talked about coming essentially to your deathbed, right? Like when I was next to my father in his last moments, right? I think this was the biggest realization, watching his life and everything like that. And then hearing another person's perspective. I was listening to something the other day, and I heard somebody's perspective about them watching their father pass. And when you are at that state, he was talking about when his father was at that state that he asked his father, what do you feel like you've missed out on, right? Or what is your biggest regrets? And he said it wasn't the money, it wasn't the material things, right? We've all talked about these things. It's none of those things. It's about the opportunities that we didn't take, the risks that we didn't take, right? Are always the biggest things that come up. And going through, the loss of my father, for me, it was always that, because I remember being younger, right? I remember wanting to start opening up, right? Buying real estate at a really young age. It was something I was very interested in. I was always interested in investing and stuff like that. But at the time I had other priorities, right? I wanted to go out and party at the time, right? As opposed to doing this stuff. But whenever it would come up, it always grabbed my attention, and I always want to do things, right? I've met other people that were big into investing, and I always wanted to sit down with them and do stuff with them. And then yet I never followed up at that given time, because partying was more of a priority for me at that time. Looking at that, realizing that, right? And then coming back into the forefront of the things I wish I would have done at that time, right? Or things I'm doing now, correcting now, right? Because you don't know if you're going to wake up tomorrow. You don't know. And it takes the realization of that loss, right? The grieving process to put things in perspective. And I talk about, this whole channel, this whole Discover Ignite has been based off of making change in your life, because a lot of times we don't think we need change, but we tolerate things that we don't want in our life, and so we'll complain about them, or we'll blame it on somebody else's fault instead of taking responsibility, getting the perspective, right? Or you have that event in your life that gives you the perspective that's like, hey, you need to wake, you need to be aware that in this moment is what matters. Where you spend your time matters, right? And I think a lot of times going through grieving and everything, you don't really think your life before then, again, wasn't the same because you thought what everybody else thought. And so now you're starting to think a little bit differently. You're starting to think about, well, am I really spending the time where I want it to be? And if not, right, a lot of people may think, well, why would you spend your time there, right? And like doing Discover Ignite and doing stocks and all these other different things, right? A lot of people may think that that's craziness, but if you don't do it, right, how would you know, right? Are you going to live with regrets, right? And this false set of security can possibly, living a miserable, going through your day just is being extremely miserable because of what other people think with the way life should be for you. Or you have this misconception about how, well, this is, I have X, Y, and Z, right? I grew up believing if you have X, Y, and Z, you should be happy and all these other different things. That comes in perspective, right? When you live through these life events, through these tragedies of a loss, right? You start coming and realizing that, hey, it matters. All this matters. Like, I shouldn't be worried about what other people think. All those times where I was fearful of saying something or trying something new, right? If you were going to die, right? If you were on your deathbed, that wouldn't stop you from doing it. And thinking about this and dealing with the grief of a loss, yes, you really do need to spend the time and let it all out, right? Stop trying to be strong, because you only get stronger till you address your weakness. Once you address the given weakness right now of the loss, right, you're going to carry that with you, and that's going to go into if you got a divorce, it's going to go into every other relationship after that fact, or if it's a loss to somebody, right, you are going to hold on to that, and it's just going to hold you down, right? You're going to think about how miserable life is at a given time, as opposed to thinking about the other options, the other opportunities that have presented yourself, because now you've been given a new perspective, right? Ultimately, when it comes to a loss of a parent or somebody like that, someone you love, right, you're given a perspective. The lesson is that you're given a new perspective, that you should realize that you need to make some changes in your life, right? And sadly, it comes to things like that. It comes to major life events, right? If it doesn't shock and awe you, right, you're not going to have the willpower, the desire to want to make a change in your life, because you've seen everything from one perspective. And that's why I talk about going out and trying new things and getting new perspectives, because you have a viewpoint, a perspective that if it's anything outside of that perspective, that it's wrong. But you'll have that life-changing events, right? The loss of something, a relationship or a parent or a loved one. And you realize that once that happens, right, it puts things more in perspective. Right? You start getting a broader vision of what life's really about. And when you get that broader vision, right, you can approach things, your tolerance level for things that are unnecessary becomes very minute, right? Like, you're not going to deal with stuff that doesn't make sense or that's stressing you out. You won't tolerate it. But unless you allow yourself, again, to address that and stop thinking that it is a weakness, then you're only going to get stronger from this point. If you can address it as opposed to holding on to the grief, the better you become, the stronger you become. Because if you hold on to the grief, you hold the weakness, those cracks internally. And at any moment, right, those cracks can essentially crumble the foundation. And so the sooner you can get to that point, to addressing it and to allow it to happen and to stop holding it in and saying it's okay that whatever X, Y, and Z happened, what am I going to learn from this? What is it really teaching me, right? Because it's just a life lesson. Life is trying to teach you something. Life has very odd ways of doing it. Whether it's a breakup, a divorce, or the loss of somebody. Life is trying to mold you into what you need to become. And so it's showing you the path. And sometimes you need those jolts in your life to get you going, to give you the willpower, to give you the desire to make change. And that's essentially the whole premise of what Discover Ignite is to realize that the way I've perceived things isn't the correct way. I'm not here to say that the way you perceive things is wrong, but in your life, your perspective on the way things are will get changed a lot better if you have more experience, if you have more perspective. You have a grander view of what your life really is, or what it really could be, is ultimately what I'm trying to say. Because I think we walk with blinders on and think that if it's not this way, if it's not black or white, that it's wrong. You can't live in a gray area. And that's wrong. I think that in itself, right, that the whole thought process of that is what needs to be changed. So deal with the grief. Face it. Turn things off. Sit with it in a dark room. Cry, scream, yell, work out, whatever you got to do. But address it. Don't push it away. It will make you stronger. You won't have cracks when you move forward. No, you'll never forget. It's always going to be there. Life will never be the same. But you'll be better for addressing it now, here and now, as opposed to waiting or trying to cover it or trying to run from it. So deal with the grief. Deal with it. It will only get better if you learn the lesson that's being taught.